Mindy, did you want to kick it off?
Sure, happy to. Hi, everyone. Welcome this afternoon. I know there are a lot of new faces, and I'm kind of your erstwhile grading reform attendee. I usually monitor avid tutoring during this time period. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Mindy Montano. I'm your English TOSA down at the district office. Former colleague of Josh's at Highland, and over the years, we've had a lot of conversations about grading reform and probably most significantly in the last 2 years. So last year we started with a small handful of teachers who wanted to explore grading reform, reading the book Grading for Equity. Um, and this year we've expanded that to another cohort. And the second year of the first cohort is reading standards. What is it? Making standards-based grading work. Josh, I apologize. I don't have the title off the top of my head.
Making grades matter.
Thank you. I knew it was something. Um, So welcome. This is, like I said, it's kind of a little die-hard band of grading reformers, and it really started with teachers. This is not a top-down organizational structure. It definitely is a grassroots group, and this is a lot of meaningful conversations throughout the last 2 years about grading and grading reform. So I want to commend Josh for the work that he's been doing on this. It's extensive, it's his wheelhouse, and I hope everybody has a great discussion today. Sheila, just to address your question in the chat, yes, he is recording this session. All right, Josh, I'll toss it back to you.
All right, thanks for kicking it off, and thanks again, Mindy, for the all the support that she gives, and for the kind of connection to the district office. And so this is grassroots, but we do have support from the district, which is great. And so yeah, just want to mention that. So thank you again for coming. I appreciate that. If you don't know me, my name is Josh Kunith. I'm from Highland High School. I teach English. So this year I teach, and I've taught for quite a while, AP English language. I teach ELD for the first year this year, which is, I love that combination. But so I've been at Highland for about 13 years. I'm department chair there too. And so my area of really focus for about the last decade or so has been grading and assessment, including some studies, my dissertation, and some other work that I do there. So I happen to be privileged, I'll say, this year to really form partnerships. It just kind of came organically with both authors of the book that we're working on, both Joe Feldman and Matt Townsley. In fact, I had a meeting this morning with Matt Townsley, and he was kind of excited that we were doing this too. So thank you for coming. I am really happy that we have this opportunity to discuss grading, specifically grading and reporting. And this is something that, I think it's an overused phrase by now, by far, unprecedented times, right? But grading and reporting is getting more emphasis, more attention now, probably than ever in the last 100 years. There are board meeting rooms around the country, administrative meetings that are talking about grades really more than ever because of the situations that are going on with distance learning. And so I think something that we don't always have the opportunity to do in school, and part of because of what grading is, what it is in the history, is to have a forum to really talk about it, right? We know that there's a history, it's well documented history in the country about grading practices are kind of, to a certain extent, private. And so there are pros and cons of that, just like anything. But to have an opportunity to talk about it, I think can help us to continue to develop our own practices in this maybe somewhat unexplored. It's to a certain extent, it's been referred to as the Wild West of teaching. And it's like maybe one of the last frontiers of teaching is grading, although it's been a lot more explored over the last 5-ish years. So thank you for coming. I hope that you can bring away an idea, maybe a practice that into your own classroom. Maybe it's tomorrow, maybe it's next semester, maybe it's once distance learning is done, maybe it's something you can share with somebody in your team, at your school. But the idea is together, this whole process becomes easier because everybody here who has been a part of grading reform for however long, that one of the hardest things is that you grade differently from almost everyone else, right? So when kids are hearing it from you, it's different and it's easy for them to forget. It's different for teachers when they hear your policies. administrators, counselors, parents, all that stuff. So as we can build capacity here of grading reform of, in a grassroots way, like Mindy mentioned, in the district, it will only become easier for us, not only for the sake of being easier, but also we know that it's better for kids as far as creating accurate and equitable grades. And that's what we're trying to do. So with that said, let's go ahead and take a quick look at the agenda. And so this is kind of what we have planned. We'll pretty much go with this. We'll see how that works. I'd like to do just a little bit of an overview of the grading reform work of the cohorts recently. And so it'll be just to reiterate for people who are in the cohorts, but if you're not familiar with it, I'd like you to know, and we are trying to build capacity to bring in possibly another cohort, I'll say soon. We don't know exactly when, but so to give you a little taste of it, if you're possibly interested, then give you a better idea. But maybe if it's not for you, at least, you get a sense, you could share it with somebody else. Okay, and then we have 3 rounds of discussion here, and we'll get into that a little bit later, which we're going to use breakout rooms for. And then kind of sandwiched in between the discussion, I have a practice I'm going to share, one of many practices to possibly consider, but I'll just sneak one in there for you to consider. And also we'll get a few people to share that are in the grading cohorts, some of their preliminary action research findings, just to get a sense of how things are going for those who are implementing grading reform and have been collecting data on it. Right, so that's our plan. And Mindy's gonna kind of man the chats in the doorway, the virtual doorway here. A few norms just to kind of keep things moving smoothly rather. First of all, if you can keep yourself muted in the whole group session when you don't have the floor, that just kind of help things a little bit. Cameras, if you're comfortable with that, it's a little bit easier to engage when we have cameras on. Easier for us to ask adults to do that than kids, right? Obviously, it's a different conversation when it's with kids. When we're having a discussion, I ask you to listen to understand, right? And a lot of times in grading, there are topics, opinions, perspectives that maybe clash with your own understanding. And so I urge you to listen to understand and then to share your perspective as well. And then maybe most importantly is I urge you to, let's all focus on the factors that are within our own locus of control, right? We know there are so many things right now that we can't control. Things at home for kids, right? Maybe it might be an effort thing. We know the list, right? But we can't control those, but we know that there are certain things that we can control. And so let's focus on that. And in the idea of having a positive impact on our work. And then finally, kind of altogether, having a growth mindset, right? How can we get better? So we all have areas that we excel at and all have areas that we can improve at. And let's embrace that in the context of grading. How can we make ourselves at least a little bit better in this next hour and 19 minutes, right? So I want to try to make myself a little better. I'm sure I will from hearing from your perspectives too. So those are a few things to keep in mind. And I hope you appreciate that Norm Macdonald in the top corner. So we have, I wasn't sure for intros, how many people we'd have here. So we have 23 right now. I think that's, we'll say manageable to go through quickly. So we'll just go through and I'll just go in the order on my screen. If you could just, say your name, department, school site, just so we get a little bit of a taste of who's here, right? And so Mindy and I already introduced ourselves. Can I go to Deanne?
Hi guys, I'm Deanne Murphy. I'm an English teacher this year, just teaching English 9 at North High.
Thanks. Sheila?
Hi, I'm Sheila Colvin. I teach biology at BHS.
Thanks. Tanya?
Sorry, I wasn't prepared to unmute myself. I'm Tanya. I teach math at Liberty.
Thanks. And I just lost my order here. Marie?
Hi, I'm Marie Fonseca. I teach math at South High.
Thanks. Cody?
Hi, I'm Cody. I teach English at Ridgeview.
Thanks. Shannon?
Hi, I'm Shannon Lassiter. I teach math at South.
I noticed that blue on your shirt there, Shannon. I figured, I knew that South kid would.
New shirt. I ordered it like last year. I just got it today. Feels like Christmas.
Thanks for being here. Laura?
Laura Huntington from Ridgeview. I teach math.
Thanks. Alyssa?
Hi, I'm Alyssa Jones. I teach 9th and 11th English at Arvin.
Thanks, Alyssa. Matt?
Hi, I'm Matt Prosser. I teach 11th grade English at Highland as well.
Thanks, Matt. Alicia?
I'm Alicia. I teach senior English at Ridgeview.
Thanks, Alicia. Casey?
Hi, I'm Casey Martinez. I teach 11 English at Arvin.
Thanks. Greg?
Hi, Greg Wattenville. I teach math at South High.
Thanks, Greg. Tina?
Hi, I'm Tina Balance. I teach English at Foothill.
Thanks, Tina. Jesse?
Hi, I'm Jessie Schapp. I teach English 9 at North.
Thanks, Jesse. Eve?
Hi, I'm Eve Childress. I teach English at Highland.
Thanks, Eve. Ellie?
Hi, I'm Elias Spain. I teach English at North.
Thanks, Ellie. Nicole?
Hi, I'm Nicole Rodriguez. I teach English and Access at North High.
Thank you. Samu?
Hi, my name is Samu Kador. I teach algebra at Ridgeview.
Thanks, Samu. Katie?
Hi, I'm Katie. I teach English at Highland.
Thanks, Katie. Christine?
Hi, Christine Courage. I teach 10 and 11 English at Independence.
Thanks, Christine. Vanessa?
Hi, I'm Vanessa Bellis. I teach Access and ELD2 at Highland.
Thanks, Vanessa. Okay. Who did I miss here? Bo just jumped in.
Joined.
And I apologize. Who did I miss?
I think you got everyone, Josh.
Okay, not bad. And Bo, you mind introducing yourself real quick? Just name, department, and school.
Yeah, no problem. Let me fire up the video feed, which is on, I think. Okay. So, Bo Larimer, I teach English at Independence High School, mainly, or not mainly, freshmen specifically. Also coach the speech and debate team there, or here, wherever there is. All right. Good to see everyone.
Thanks for coming, Bo. Appreciate that. Thanks again, everybody. And all right, let's go ahead and move forward here. So just a little bit of an overview of the purpose of the work for the grading reform cohorts. And I'd like you to, whether you're part of the cohorts or not, I'd like you to try to, let's kind of keep this in our mind for today in our discussion. And if you have, questions about this, about some of these ideas and the purpose, then maybe in your discussion breakout rooms, it'd be a great time to ask or to question or even to push back about some of these. So the purpose of our work in the grading reform cohorts is to improve teacher grading practices, grading and reporting, in order to increase accurate communication of student learning and increase the equity of grades. So we're trying to focus on the accuracy and equity. Like those are the two keys, accuracy and equity. And that'll be a reoccurring theme throughout today. So let me just define briefly what these mean, because there's kind of a lot in there, but just to kind of get right to the point, when I say accurate grades, because that can be interpreted in a lot of different ways. By accurate, my definition of that is that they accurately communicate student learning of priority standards, and that's it, or targets. That's it. So again, by accurate grades, I mean they accurately communicate student learning. So what is not there, maybe just as importantly, what's not there is communicating effort or behavior or participation or attitude or the myriad of other possible factors that often end up in a grade. right? And so we want to make it only about learning. Equitable grades, this comes from a definition specifically from Joe Feldman's book, Grading for Equity, which is the first book that everybody starts in the grading cohorts with. And he defines it as equitable grades. It has that accuracy actually in there. So there's just a tad bit of redundancy, but I thought it's worth emphasizing. So it's grades that are accurate, okay, which I redefined, bias resistant. So meaning, so those biases that are a part naturally of all of us, but using factors like effort and behavior especially bring out the biases, and that grades that are motivational for kids. That's how we and how he defines equitable grades. And so he goes more into detail quite a bit in his 3 pillars of equitable grading. Okay, so that's what I mean by accurate and equitable. So our first kind of little bit of discussion here. I want to ask you, and I'm going to challenge you to try to be as kind of open and honest as you can be when thinking about your own grades. Because again, that growth mindset, we all have ways that we can improve in our grading practices, right? And it's just a matter of what is it and how can we do it? So knowing that it's not too far, we're not too far away from reporting our first semester grades, right? And if we think about the significance of that, the first time that we've ever had to report traditional grades in distance learning, right? Ever in the history of school. So that's a pretty big deal. And so we know that there's lots of context there. So with that being considered, I'm just going to ask you right now, how would you rate your first semester student grades in terms of accuracy and equity based off of those definitions that I just mentioned, right? And so I have kind of a simple rubric right here. How would you rate yourself right now in the creation of those grades? Okay, so would you say, so I've defined mastery as highly accurate and equitable, proficient, mostly accurate and equitable, developing somewhat, beginning, not very. Okay, and again, we know that there are lots of implications, there's lots of reasons for that, a lot of things that are out of our control. So there's no blame here at all, but just really trying to think about what our grades are, where they're at in terms of accuracy and equity, so that we can go about finding ways to address them and increase that accuracy and equity. If you're comfortable, I invite you to share on the chat. You can just share a performance level. If you want to give some more context, feel free. Leave it up to you. Yeah, and sometimes, like Alyssa's saying there, it depends on maybe the period, depends on the course, right? So I'll just share a little bit myself as we have some people that are adding some in. I feel like for many different reasons, my AP grades, I would say I feel like I've been proficient in mostly accurate and equitable. I feel like for my ELD grades, I feel like I'm lacking the accuracy. One of the big reasons why, and equity too, because so many kids have not turned things in. And I'm trying to find a way to I know it's not zero learning. I know that the F represents zero learning. I know it's not necessarily that, but I'm trying to find a way to get that information. And until I can do it, it's not accurate and it's not equitable either.
Yeah, Josh, I'd echo that same sentiment that the classes that are struggling the most are, I feel like, more disparate in how in the accuracy of reporting their grades.
Yeah, thanks for sharing, Matt. That makes me feel a little bit better.
I would agree that the idea of accuracy is difficult because kids aren't turning in their work. But having said that, if we're saying that zero learning is going on, I'm going to venture to say that if they literally don't sign on and don't do any work for a whole semester, there probably isn't any learning going on. Not to say that they've never learned anything, but if we're looking at the standard, for example, I'm teaching geometry. We started proofs today. For all the kids who didn't sign on and never going to sign on and never going to do any work for proofs, I'm going to say that their learning of proofs is probably zero. So I think that can be accurate.
I think that's a great point, Tanya. I think there are some instances of zero learning. I guess my broader point was that in many cases, it's not a case of zero learning. It's a case of zero evidence, and zero evidence and zero learning are two different things, but sometimes they are the same thing. I agree.
I would even maybe add that it would vary from subject to subject. I mean, you're teaching math, so you're absolutely right. You know, we're teaching English, which is art, so it's a little more abstract, and they might, I don't want to say learn by just being there, just hearing things, but you don't do that really in math. You know what I mean? So that might be another factor to consider.
I think distance learning is unique too, in that I can't verify that they're actually there. So it is actually possible, like Tanya said, that they log in on their black screen and then they go play Xbox. And so, yes, they're not learning anything, versus a kid who's not engaged in my classroom, at least is physically sitting there. And I can verify that at the very least, they are hearing the information. So I think I'm maybe a little bit more uniquely to say that, yes, the kids who have never engaged, I can see that they're not doing anything on Canvas, that I feel pretty good, even though I also have an absence of evidence that there's probably a pretty strong argument in distance learning that there's also an absence of learning, where I wouldn't be able to make that argument when we're in the classroom.
I think also one of the struggles that I know at our site we've been working with the advent of the push-in of special education into a lot of our classes is looking at different types of evidence. I know, like my team, we've been having to make considerations about, not necessarily replacement of assignments, but like when we offer a writing assignment, how are our special education students also demonstrating learning? And I know I've been having to work pretty creatively with my co-teacher to sort of rethink and reflect and kind of reinvent how we can show what evidence of learning really means for a lot of our students. So it's kind of like, I guess, sort of turning everything that we have already known, maybe some of those biases that we come in when we create curriculum, and really think about, and also with distance learning, being able to think about, well, what are the alternatives? What are the other ways that a student can demonstrate mastery?
Deanne, that really resonates for me. That's called, it is termed by some people, alternative forms of evidence. That's a great way to tap into UDL. And again, if a student doesn't turn in, for example, doesn't turn in an assessment, they never do it, well, you might have some evidence of them along the way that shows, yes, they can write a thesis statement. Now, you might say that the evidence and that practice isn't as valid as that summative assessment, but it is something. It's definitely not a zero if zero represents zero learning, right? And so it's something that is a starting place. And it can be something that's motivational. It's a motivational practice, talking about the pillars of equity. And so I think that's a great point for alternative evidence. If we're okay with that, we're going to move on to the next part. There looks like there's some really good things in the chat that I look forward to checking out later. I think it's a good start here to our discussion. So I just want to share a couple other things related to grading and some of the work that we do in the grading cohorts that hopefully, even if you're not a part of this, you can think about this, maybe grading in a little bit different way, or it's an idea to look into further, or just to reinforce for those people who are in. So 3 key tenets. I tend to find that when people start disagreeing about grading, whether it's in a learning team, it's across departments, a department meeting, wherever, that they don't have the same purpose in mind for grading. And so I think that's why it's always a key place to start when you're trying to establish a common grading policy at whatever level, that you start with a purpose, right? And so the purpose that we start with in our tenets here is that the primary purpose of grades is to communicate student academic achievement of established learning expectations. So that's just kind of a fancy way to communicate learning of targets or standards. I think that last part is important because it's really easy to rationalize a grade and say, well, I expect them to talk, so they got 0 because they didn't talk and they weren't participating. If that is a standard, then it could make sense, but it should be established learning expectations. Excuse me. A second one is that the primary audience of our grades is for students and parents. And it's pretty important to establish that audience too, because our grades can't be everything to everyone. And we know we want our grades to be we want to really clearly communicate it. And so in a sense, we're kind of, we're kind of making an argument about what our policy is. And like any good argument, we know as English teachers, those of us who are English teachers, you got to know your audience, right? We got to know who we're communicating to. So yes, we want it to be clear to colleges, that's true, to counselors and administrators, but grades are meant for students and for parents. And that's who we're targeting in all of our resources that we're using to communicate their learning. And then lastly, I think maybe a big reason why we wanted to invite as many people today as possible is because it really takes a village, right? Like as the saying goes, so to really have an impact on the whole child. But so it takes teachers, administrators, and schools, rather, they all have the responsibility to ensure equitable grades. And because it's a matter of equity, right? And so equity extends to grading practices. And it's one of those, something that really impacts the future lives of students. So a few tenets. And then here's just an idea of the commitments in case you're possibly considering joining a cohort in the future. What we ask people to do is to read the book of study. So as I mentioned, we start with this one. A lot of the work is based off of Joe Feldman's Grading for Equity. And then our first cohort has moved on to the second book, Making Grades Matter. Mindy mentioned that, by Matt Townsley and Nathan Weir. Also to commit with a team. So we find that, I think as most of us know, in grading reform, you need support. As I mentioned before, everybody's doing it differently. And without that support, we get pressure, right? We get pressure sometimes from students, from parents, from administrators, from outside sources. And just like the idea of a learning team is you make collective decisions that are based off of research, and then you implement, you can be confident with that. Well, the same thing goes, and that's why we ask teams to join whenever possible. We also ask people to implement and study at least one practice, right? So it's one thing to talk, it's one thing to study, it's another thing to implement and to take action. And we ask everybody to take action by at least implementing one practice. We ask people to share their grade books, which can be scary, right? Sometimes, because we kind of have this tradition of privacy of grades, and to share practices and things like that, to collect and to share evidence, and to commit to attending these types of sessions. So again, just a little glimpse of what we ask for people who join the cohorts. So here are the three different parts of discussion that we have planned. The first one is looking back just a little bit. First semester, what were some successes that you had? What were some challenges that you had? And, so a way to talk with other people and get a better sense of where everybody is at. Hopefully get a chance to grow just a little bit, maybe a lot. Part two is to look into the near future. We have final exams that are coming up. Distance learning final exams, right? It's hard to believe that's even a thing, but it is. So what are we going to do about this, right? They're going to be coming in January. So we still have the break to still make some final plans if we need to. Report card grades are coming up, right? So that idea of D's and F's and all the other grades above that too, that's just a part of those grades of report cards. So something to be thinking about and talking about. And then looking a little bit farther into the future, second semester grading practices. So what can we learn from what we've done, and how can we modify that second semester? How can we tweak that? At the same time, balancing and knowing we got to be fair. We have to be fair and transparent with grading practices. We can't make too many changes. So it's really kind of an art to do that if we're mid-year. At the same time, if we know it's going to be for the best for our students, why are we going to wait if it's going to benefit them? So these are the three different parts. Okay, so with that, I think it would really be helpful if you didn't already open up the presentation. Mindy, if you don't mind maybe putting that one more time, that link in there, just so you can see the questions. These are the questions that we have prepared for discussion part one. So what successes have you had? What challenges? And then what problems do you still have?
So are we doing it just as a one group here?
So I'm going to get everybody into breakout rooms right now.
Okay, sorry.
No problem. And let's see, I'm looking at the numbers. we're gonna make, we'll make it 4 to 5. Okay, and we're gonna try, it's not a ton of time. I apologize for that, but we're gonna, about 7 minutes for right now. So not a ton of time, but, and then we'll come back and kind of share out big ideas. Okay, so you should be getting an invitation right now, and you can go ahead and jump right in.
Sorry about that. I was chomping at the bit to respond there. Got cut off. My bad, guys.
Welcome back, everybody. I think you can, I have this theory that you can measure the quality of discussion in breakout rooms in Zoom based off of how quickly people come back when they're called to come back, right? If they come back right away, it's like, wow, they want to get out, they want to stare at each other anymore, right? So I had an opportunity to drop into each of those, and I thought it's a really high quality kind of, I think in qualitative research, they call this thick description. There's just so much in there. Here are some key words that I heard repeated over and over, used in different contexts, all about grading, of course: feedback, grade distribution, pacing, process, formative versus summative, assessment, behavior. Those came up a few times. We do have a few minutes that I'd like to take right now. If you had a particularly salient idea that you heard, or something that really resonated with you, I'd like to invite you to share, please. What did you hear? That was some good stuff that's worth sharing.
I can start. One thing I know that Eve and I have both experienced that we shared with our group is that because of the reform, and we're both in our second year of practice, that we are able to very quickly identify how a student is doing, what they need to do to improve within minutes to anybody. Before, for me, with my old grading system, that was probably at least a 20 to 30 minute activity I needed to do. I needed to print out a grade reform. I needed to color code things. And it was a big process. Now I can do that with students in class in less than 2 minutes. I know exactly where they are, what they're doing, and what they need to do to improve.
I'm going to echo off of Casey's comments and say that I think our English 9 team at North High, we've been noticing that same thing, that while we're still having issues with kids maybe not completing assignments, not working, it's been much easier to ascertain what that student needs to do to help improve their evidence of learning. We've been weighting the assessments a lot heavier. So a biggest problem or challenge with that comes is trying to help shift the student's mindset to stop worrying about all of those little practices. You need to focus on the thing that is going to be like most bang for your buck in terms of learning. They keep wanting to focus on like, that 10 to 20% category of their grade, which is the practice stuff. Almost makes me wonder again, like in my mind, like for my personal grading, I obviously emphasizing it should all be assessment in their grade and not the practices. But I think that's been a real blessing with all of this, is that, when a kid wants to know finally, like, okay, I know I need to step up and engage. What do I need to do? What Casey said, I can take, literally, I can point to these items, demonstrate that you haven't learned what you need to learn. We need to jump on that. Rather than sifting through gobs of stuff, it's much easier to target what that student needs.
Great, thanks. Anybody willing to share a challenge or a problem? So those are both mostly great positives, but how about a challenge or a problem that you thought resonated?
I think one of the things that our group, we all agreed on is one of the biggest challenges is feedback. Giving feedback in a way that's different than in the classroom, especially as the math teachers, we talked about how usually you can run around and you can see, oh, they added wrong, or, whatever. And you can give them that immediate feedback by looking over their shoulder and watching them do the process, which you can't do. And then the idea that we all talked about, a lot of our kids, didn't even know we were leaving feedback, and then being able to communicate to them that they were getting feedback, and then getting them to actually read the feedback. So this idea that I really think learning comes from feedback and not being able to successfully do that.
Right. Great, thank you. We're going to have a couple more rounds here, so I appreciate that. I especially like the fact that in all the discussions, it was focusing on what is within our locus of control. So I applaud you for that. All right, we have a brief intermission here from our discussion, and I'd like to present for you a practice to consider. Now, this might be something that you're doing. This might be something that you've thought of. This might be something that you've heard. Wherever you're at, I like you to I ask you to consider, to think about it. And actually, Deanne kind of talked about this a little bit just a minute ago. So, so here's the idea. The practice is to increase your relative weight of summative assessment in the overall grade. Okay, now here's why. Going back to the purpose of grades, and I think it always goes back to that, right? When we're determining practices, we want to think about purpose. That's why it's so important to establish those purposes in the first place. So if we say that a purpose of grade is to communicate student learning, right, of established learning standards or targets, we know that we have one main tool to do that. It's summative assessment. That's it. It's not formative assessment, because formative assessment, as we know, is to measure where kids are at so far, right? Like in the middle of a unit, right? It's not at the end, right? So we also know that if we do score, and I've been there, so I'm not pointing any fingers here, for sure. I've learned I like to think mostly learn from my mistakes, although I still have mistakes to make and to learn from. But anyway, if we're grading kids based off of homework and formative assessment, in a way, the message that we're sending to them is it's not okay to make mistakes, right? Because if it was okay to make mistakes, they wouldn't be punished with grades. Now, I know then the question is, well, why are they going to do the work and all that? Well, there are some things we can use to address that motivation, but that's maybe for another conversation. So I would like you to consider increasing the weight of summative assessment, because again, if summative assessment is a single tool that we have to measure student learning at the end of the learning progression, then in theory, that's all the grade should be. If we truly mean that's what the grade is supposed to represent, learning once they've had a chance to go through that entire progression. So here are some things to consider based upon wherever you are, relatively speaking, in your weights, and whether it's you or your team or your department, your school. So maybe it's moving it up a little bit to 60%. Okay, I think that's what somebody mentioned that earlier. So moving that weight, and in yellow, by the way, that's the summative assessment weight, so to speak. So at least it's the majority of the grade is summative assessment. Maybe you do something like that already, so you move it up a little bit higher. So lots of the grading literature, by the way, recommends at least an 80-20 split. At least 80% is summative assessment, and then 20% would be perhaps formative assessment, practice, things like that, quizzes. But ideally, if grades truly represent learning, it's 100% summative assessment. And again, well, I just went through the rationale and why. That is something that we do in the English 11 learning team at Highland. And so it's not without its challenges. Obviously, there are lots of challenges. And one of the things I think it's really important to consider is this has to be paired with, that last bullet point there, has to be paired with, I'll say, liberal relearning and retake policies. That's a must, an absolute must. Because it's not even about being more strict or being more rigorous. It's about being more accurate and more equitable, actually. That's what it's really about. And here's why, because sometimes it sounds counterintuitive. I already mentioned about grades and how we, if we say it's about accuracy, accuracy is about measuring learning. That's some assessments are for that. So that's the accuracy part. But also on the flip side of that, we might just consider when we do include behaviors and effort, right? So those things are not learning, right? Those things are open to our own biases. And that helps to, well, what that leads to is decreasing the accuracy, right? So that 40%, that is increasing the inaccuracy. At 20%, that inaccuracy. If we define, remember those definitions are really important. That accuracy meaning reporting student learning based off of learning targets. At the same time, so why equity? Again, people don't equate using summative assessment as equitable. Well, then we don't leave ourselves open to these biases about effort, right? And so there's a lot to be said. And I think, I don't want to say this very quickly and not do a thorough job, but this book does a really good job explaining why grading for behaviors that we seek out, that we determine are good behaviors based off of how we are raised, what we are taught, we are from, what we determine are good behaviors, and we reward students with grades sometimes. This book does a good job explaining why that is inequitable. And the same thing goes to a certain extent for effort. And there are implications for, what can kids do at home? What can't they do? Responsibilities and things like that, right? So actually increasing the weight of summative assessment in your grade will increase the accuracy and the equity. And again, that's what kind of our work is all about. Again, those retake policies are really important. And one more thing I'll mention about that is all the things that we traditionally use grades for, like things about behavior and about effort and participation and attendance and maybe all that kind of stuff. When we take grades away, then we need to have policies to truly address those other things that grades were taken care of before, right? But so that's the tough part. But the good news is grades are kind of just like a Band-Aid on those. Like they're not, if we give a student a 0 for plagiarism, did they really learn, right? Did they really learn their lesson? Or are they going to do that again, right? Did they really, do they really know why? Same thing goes for, for tardies, lower grade. Do they really learn the lesson? So we get to have those conversations, but we've got to have those structures in place. And that's why I think grading reform is a high leverage reform, because we're not only talking about grading like we are, but we're talking about all those other things too that are related to grading. And so there's a lot there. So that's a practice I'd like you to consider and to think about, and maybe that's something you feel free to talk about in our next round of discussion if you would like. But so with that, here are the next round of questions that we have for you. Okay, so I just introduced it a little bit before, but so talking about the near future, final exams are coming up. Our semester grades are coming up. And then one, if you're comfortable with talking about, that's up to you. DNF rates, right? This is something that is a big concern around the country, in our district and around the country right now, right? We know certain groups, especially special ed and ELD, the DNF rates are skyrocketing, right? Are you concerned? We have a time and a place right now to talk about it, right? So I hope everybody here, I'm sure we will keep this, amongst ourselves, but we have that opportunity. I feel like we don't have a lot of chances to talk about it. So I hope you feel comfortable to talk about it, but as much as you feel comfortable, please do so. Right, so I'm going to go ahead and open up those breakout rooms again, maybe give a couple extra minutes. There's kind of a lot of stuff here. So I'm going to do that right now. And it's going to be the same breakout rooms. All right, they should be open for you right now. right, guys, we're just going to wait a few minutes for everybody to come back here. So a few more seconds, I think.
Poor Matt keeps getting cut off in our rooms.
Okay, so thanks again. That sounded like another great round of discussion. Here were some common terms and phrases that I heard as I was dropping in each room. Unsure, a lack of certainty about finals, rubrics, creativity, a lack of evidence, multiple opportunities, adjusting, re-evaluating standards. So I'd like to invite you again to share if you heard something, or maybe it was something that you said and you felt like it came out well. Anything that resonated or that was especially salient. I'd like to invite you to share.
Well, in group 1, we talked about the pace at which some teachers are moving and the DNF rate and whatnot. An email went around about something in module 4 of a sophomore curriculum, and some teachers were responding that they were already at the end of module 4. And I worked on the summer curriculum with you and a few other people here, and I'm at the end of module 2. And I feel like when teachers are just assign, like kids are going to end up with D's and F's because they just can't keep up. And I don't think in my opinion, the teaching isn't really happening if you're at the end of module 4.
That's a great point. Pacing,
Yeah.
to what end? I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was going to agree with that. Where I'm at in calculus this year is probably 2 months behind where I would be usually. What I'm doing for my final is there's probably about 6 standards that we've taken assessments on through the semester. And so the final is just going to be, if there's an assessment in there that you want to improve on, you can study and retake that assessment to bring your grade up. If you're happy with where your grade is, then we're going to do a practice AP exam, but it's hold harmless. It's not going to bring your grade down. And I'm doing that for my math analysis too. They can't hurt themselves. They can only help themselves unless they don't do anything. Because like you said, this is probably one of the few times I'm doing the behavior grade. You need to show me you're trying, but you can improve by doing the standard again.
Can you repeat that, Laura? I didn't catch that.
Sure. So what I'm doing is we've had probably 6 standards that we've taken assessments on. And I've been doing just quizzes on a single standard, whereas before I'd have 2 or 3 on one test. And so for their final, if they've got a standard that they didn't do well on, that they didn't do a retake at that time, they can go back and study that and do that for the final. Basically do another version of that assessment for the final. If they're happy with where their grade is, then they'll do a practice AP exam to get ready for that in the spring.
Love the flexibility of the options. Anybody else? This is a tougher one to kind of share whole group sometimes. Cody, seems like you want to say something.
Yeah, I don't know, kind of going off of whatever I put in the chat. One of the things, and maybe this is just the benefit of being ELA, but really, so my finals are always writing, and one of the things, especially with the younger grades, but also in the older students too, we focus on how writing is you don't produce a product, but that writing is an experience. And so, and we look at, the writing process and also that it's communal and not individual in terms of just, collaboration and brainstorming and all that. And so the final tends to reflect that, where we look through and having the students brainstorm together. And I'm trying to figure out now with distance learning how I do this, but at least in analog times, we have the students, spend like a good, 45 minutes to an hour where they have the prompt, they have kind of the tools they have for collaboration and organization. And then, but they also have the tools in terms of being able to begin, develop, and in what usually a synthesis essay. And so, but this is like, Yeah, I mean, I want when the student leaves the final that they feel like they had a good time, that they grew as a thinker, that they've been able to explore concepts that they may not have been familiar with so much before the final, but afterwards they're able to delve in it and they felt really good about it. I think what's been a real bummer, and I brought this up in the breakout group, is that when I hear students back once again in analog times, when they're talking in the corridors about their classes, they're talking about the grades they got. They're not talking about the content. They're not talking about the scholarship. And I think they're just reflecting a system that really kind of focuses on that. And that's a bummer. I mean, I would love it if the students came out of, the AP Lang class down the hall and we're discussing, oh my God, here rhetoric and Aristotle and whatever. But instead it's like, oh my gosh, you got this, I got that. And then there we go. And so no shade on that guy. He's just over there and it's great. That's for all the teachers. It's probably for me too. And so it needs to be a shift in culture. And that happens when we actually examine how the structure of education affects discourse and perception. This is a language. We need to change it.
And that's a great transition. Thanks for that thoughtful response. I think so. We're going to talk a little bit about some initial results from action research from a couple of people in our cohorts. So thanks again for all of those thoughtful responses. I just want to mention 3 maybe ideas to consider about finals. They're not necessarily recommendations, but they're just ideas to consider. Number 1 is to consider the fact that usually final exams are the single exam that students do not have an opportunity to retake. High stakes, no retakes, right? That could be disaster for some kids, especially in distance learning, right? It always can be, but especially now. Like that's one thing. Another thing is the traditional heavy weights on final exams. That might be something else that we reconsider, right? These are exceptional times. We might reconsider those heavy weights. Another thing, a third thing is the possibility of allowing, and some of you talked about that, allowing students to retake or for the final exam to count as a retake for previously assessed standards and as an opportunity to replace maybe those lower scores if they show that their growth. And after all, if they show learning growth at the very end of the semester, why should it count against them if they just didn't quite get it, if it took them longer to learn, right, in distance learning? So those are just a few things to consider maybe as you're reconsidering final exams as we're getting closer. Because I don't know about you. Oh, yes, go ahead.
On the interesting thing about if you go to the 4-point rubric and you grade more on that GPA scale like we were doing last year, is the weighting of the final completely changes. Because last year I did that and I had my final was 20% of their grade. And so we were ready for the big shifts that we always see. In the old standard, you have 10% between each letter grade. So 20% can be a 2-grade swing. On a 4-point system, you have 25% between each letter grade. So 20% isn't going to swing you unless you were right on a border. And so that was kind of a happy unintended consequence last year, is I could still keep that final grade weight, but it really didn't shift their grades.
You know what? And that's why we have math teachers a part of this, because I never thought of that in that perspective. So thank you, Laura, for adding that math perspective. Okay, so a little bit about the action research that we asked people to be a part of in our cohorts. As I mentioned, asked everybody to study, to implement and study at least one practice. And kind of getting back to what Cody was saying is, in part at least, let's take action and let's study our practices. Let's gather evidence for that, and then draw some conclusions. But the thing about action research, it's just like in the classroom, it's never ending, right? We don't want to stop. It's that growth mindset. It's a continual cycle. And so we're kind of evaluating at each step. We're thinking, we're gathering evidence, we're making decisions, and that continues. There are a couple links there if you want to check those out, to a template, an example, and a list of 20 recommended grading practices and policies that mostly come from Grading for Equity. I think there's one, the logic rule, that comes from Making Grades Matter, if you're interested what that is. That's one at Highland we're doing in English 11, which I think has had some initial success. I'm excited about. So have a few people that they're going to talk. We don't have a lot of time, so I'm sorry, just maybe a couple minutes. If so, Casey and Alyssa at Arvin, and then I asked Sheila from BHS. So Casey and Alyssa are English, and Sheila is biology. Casey and Alyssa, would you mind briefly sharing a little bit about what you guys are studying and some initial results?
I'll start if Alyssa doesn't mind. Hers is going to be far more impressive, so I won't go. I also didn't realize that we were doing such a large group today. I thought I was talking to my cohort, so if you'll forgive my anecdotal evidence a little bit. So the two areas I decided to focus on this year in my action research plan was I switched to standards-based grading, where last year I had done more skills-based. So I would break my standard down into X amount of skills. Standards-based was a lot more accurate, and it's a lot easier for me to, I'm a much more targeted teacher. So my teaching has become a lot more effective. The other thing I look to implement is I did a sliding scale for their grade this year, where last year it was just straight assessments. Last year, the challenge with that was it was a lot of anxiety for parents and students because they really had to complete the whole semester before they really had access to A's and B's. And even though they got there, it wasn't worth the anxiety that all of us and the counselors included experienced on our journey there. So, and this was conversations I got to have with my PLT and other members on our campus as we talked about sort of like on our rubric, like what does beginning look like, developing, proficient, exceed. So we sort of decided on something that was as equitable and accessible as we could make it at each one of those points. So what did an exceeding student look like as far as skill development at each one of our grading points? And then the other thing that I added on afterwards with distance learning is and it's related, but maybe not exact. What does engagement look like? After a first couple of weeks of distance learning, that was really difficult. I got together with one of our science teachers and we rethought engagement. And the thing we thought is that engagement in distance learning is maybe not cameras, microphones, and showing up to class. So then we really thought about how we could repackage what we had distantly. And maybe engagement was actually finishing an assignment or actually participating in an online discussion. And so we did some research too into how to package and deliver that information. Quarter one went really, really well. I felt really good about the equity, the accessible nature of what I had. My progress report grades that I just did they're terrible. Kids have stopped doing things. We talked about that in my breakout room. I decided to stop where I was in their curriculum because I think that my students are exhausted. Piggyback on like what Christine says, I have a nephew in the Kern High School district right now too, and I am blown away by the amount of work he gets every single day. Just the hours that he is spending outside of the classroom to finish things that, in my humble opinion, feel like a giant waste of time. And it's hard. And my students, as I check in with them, have been communicating that same thing about how overwhelmed they are. So I actually stopped where we were, and we're taking these 2 weeks to reassess, to catch up, and for me to do more pointed checking in with them. So I'll have to report back at the end of the semester to see where grades end up, because I think that exhaustion is a really big thing. I know for me, this has been a hard week. It's been really hard for me to just focus and get things done this week. And I think the kids feel the same way. But quarter, I feel like I can safely go off of quarter. It's been really, really encouraging. I didn't think my kids were going to learn anything this year, and I didn't think I could be effective. And I am a little bit shocked by the level of learning that's happening in my classroom. And it's a relief. So if you'll forgive my anecdotal stuff, that's what I have so far.
Thanks. I appreciate it, Casey. And Alyssa and Sheila, and I'm sorry, it will have to be brief. We're getting short. Maybe our last discussion we'll just kind of do all together. But Alyssa, please.
Well, no worries, because the research that I've conducted, you guys should be able to view it on the Grading Cohort shared drive. I already uploaded it there. I was pretty lucky this year because I'm currently getting my master's. In fact, I just turned in my cumulative exams in yesterday. And the focus of my action research project was originally supposed to be focusing on the feedback process and how to implement that in a distance learning environment. But the more that I started looking into it, the more I just looked at grading practices as a whole, you know, how that can be adopted for distance learning. And I was able to draw comparisons between two of my Health Careers Academy groups from this year to two of my Health Academy groups from last year. So the overall process, yeah, I've done a lot of soul searching. I've done a lot of, you know, rocking back and forth, crying underneath my desk because, you know, last year was difficult enough already adopting these new grading standards. And then this year, you know, the strategies that I relied on for grading reform last year weren't working. And I had grown to love them and I grew a little attached to them. So, you know, now I'm thinking about things differently. So if you guys want to check that out, yeah, it's on the it's on the shared drive, and I've never done this before. So if you guys want to leave me some constructive comments and feedback, I'd appreciate it. And yeah, that's terrifying. So.
Thanks for sharing. Congrats on finishing that, Alyssa. Yeah, I'm looking forward to looking at that for sure. And so thanks a lot. I appreciate that. And Sheila, would you mind sharing?
Sure. I think mine's going to be mostly anecdotal as well. So basically, this is my first year being a part of this. And I think what is important to include, aside from the results, is why. And I feel like over several years of teaching, I had really noticed a disconnect between what I was feeling and seeing in the classroom with my students and what I was entering into the grade book. And I didn't know how to rectify that situation. So I implemented full standards-based grading this year and a 4-point scale, scoring rubrics. I'm doing the most recent score. I'm allowing retakes of assessments, no penalty for late work. And, you know, it has really, I think, helped me to realize how much I have felt, you know, maybe not from anybody else, maybe it is, but I don't know, to stay on pace versus really identify. And just for context, I have 3 general level courses. And I would say most of my students are reading at the red level. So what is that, below 6th grade? And when I really jumped into it this year, I think what it showed me is that most of my students didn't have any of the background knowledge that they needed in 4th grade. Thank you, below 4th grade. Most of my students didn't have any of the background knowledge that they needed in order to be successful with science. And so I just needed to slow the heck down. And then of course that's amplified by distance learning as well. I have had a lot of students who have a lot more students, I think, than normally would, that have come back to me and said, hey, can I, you know, I didn't get that assignment done. Can I get it done? And the answer is always yes. And the answer is always followed up by, remember though, that it's for learning. It's 100% for you learning. So, you know, when you're doing it, if you want to sit with me and go over it or ask any questions, then make sure that you do that. I've incorporated a lot of formative assessment as well. And I think it's really allowed me to give students more ownership over their own learning. I've told them that, you know, the assignments that I have aren't the be all end all way to learn the content that we have in the class. And if they find a way that works better for them, then they should do it and tell me about it so I can incorporate that. It's been a little bit more of a deterrent for cheating because there's not an incentive to cheat. So that's been really effective as well. and there's a lot less focus on the score versus what does that mean? I don't understand that. Can you explain that to me? You know, the focus has shifted slightly to you know, really wanting to understand what we're doing instead of, you know, just kind of get this done and get it over with. And I think my class, if nothing else, it has been a respite for some of them that have had tons of work in other classes, because I have expanded the amount of time that I'm spending on a lot of this stuff, and that gives them space to be able to focus on math and English and some of their other, what I would say maybe are more high stakes classes for them.
Thank you, Sheila. Appreciate that. And I appreciate the work that you're doing and the action research plan. Same Casey, Alyssa, and everybody else that didn't get a chance to share. I appreciate that. We're going to have some more focused time on that early next semester. And so thank you for that work. I think that's going to help to bring other people into grading reform in whatever capacity. So thank you again for sharing. Appreciate that. Here's a reoccurring theme I've heard. So this is one of my takeaways from everybody here is pacing. That's come up a number of times. And I think maybe the idea is don't be a slave to the pacing guide, right? Because pacing is kind of the enemy of accuracy and equity, right? If we're sticking to pacing because that's what the guide says. So I think that's one of my takeaways. Again, thanks for sharing. All right, we're almost out of time here. I think maybe if we could just finish with sharing out a little bit, what modifications, maybe that top one, anybody want to share a modification that you're thinking of making mid-year, just as a way to give somebody an idea of what could be done, even though it's in the middle of the year, and maybe in the interest, that idea of if it's good for students, why wait until next year, right? But at the same time, knowing we have to balance and be clear with our policies to students and parents. Anybody have any particular modifications mid-year you're going to be making?
What I'm going to do is I have my standards on a spreadsheet for the students that have the learning targets that go with it. And I'm going to make videos of myself teaching just that standard, because I don't like how Khan Academy or people explain it. And my students have been asking me for videos. So I'm going to take each learning goal or a couple of learning goals and make just a video of what that means for next semester.
Great. Thanks, Lauren. That made me think of, I plan to make some more videos of myself explaining these grading practices for kids. I have a couple, but I mean, again, we're the difference. We're the outlier in terms of grading practices and policies from other teachers. I think the more that they hear it when they want to hear it is helpful. I think somebody else was about to share.
No, Josh, I was just going to say Bo has his hand up, but I don't know if he knows he has his hand up or if he wants to share.
Oh, I put it up. I forgot to take it back down. When we were talking about finals, I was going to just say it's interesting. It's easy to forget that the kids aren't as tech savvy kind of across the board. And so even with the finals and everything, kind of as a practice, trying to simplify the technology side of things. So I don't want the tech mastery to be something reflected in the final grade, or that bleeding into, right, how well they have mastery of technology being how well they've mastered the skill, which is, I think, something that can happen easily and affects kind of that equity issue, because some kids grow up with their own laptops and some kids, right, don't have the same access to tech. I was going to add that I intended to do this semester, and I just, right, good intention, didn't get to it. Is to try to schedule and push towards at least trying to reach out through email and kind of set up maybe easy scheduling for students to have kind of a small group or one-on-one conferences. And I think, right, that's where a lot of really important instruction could happen for kids that need that extra intervention teaching, is in that small groups, if you can connect with them. And maybe even like open office hours of like, hey, swing by and talk to me about this or that. and try and create that space and opportunity for kids to be able to meet and talk to me in small groups, where in our huge Zoom meetings, right, there's not that space for that. And I think that would go well with kind of intervention stuff.
Yeah, great. Thanks for sharing too. That's just about our time. If you're looking for some further reading, there's that book that I mentioned, Grading for Equity, and then the Making Grades Matter. This one, Standards-Based Grading in Action, or I think Standards-Based Learning actually, but there's grading is a big part, by Tom Schimmer. This is another one by Tom Schimmer, Grading from the Inside Out. Great resources. Tom Schimmer has really taken over as one of the lead writers, I will say, for practitioners in grading. He's maybe taken that the throne unofficially from Gusky. I don't know, it's pretty close. But here is an English specific one, if you're interested in that, by Sarah Zerwin. And there are some good things about this. There are some that I don't philosophically totally agree with, but I think there's some good ideas nonetheless. A couple by Gusky there too. So anyway, they're all good. They're all worth having. So next steps, just a last thought here. If you're interested, possibly if you're not in cohort and you're interested in the future, feel free to email me or Mindy. If you have just questions, you don't want to officially commit or you're too busy, whatever, still feel free to email me about grading, and I'd love to share it or talk about it. And if you like this session, if you enjoyed it, let us know, because we'd like to do some more of them in the future. And remember, the more of us that are a part of this, the easier for all of us. So the easier, but really it's better, for our students. We can make it more accurate and equitable. And again, let's keep that lens, accuracy, equity for our grading, and that will have lots of benefits in the future. Thank you again for coming. I enjoyed this. I hope you did, but I enjoyed being part. So have a good day. Thanks for giving up your time. Thanks for coming.
Thanks, Josh.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, buddy.
Thanks, Josh and Mindy. Bye, you guys.
Bye-bye, everyone. Thank you.
Guys.